Okay. Welcome to the podcast, Neeta.
Thank you, Anna. It's so amazing to be here with you today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. You're an international speaker, author, and an advocate for emotional confidence. And your mission is to build global community of progressive thinkers, doers, forward driving movers and shakers, and so much more. And I was just curious, were you always somebody who was a really motivated and a super high achiever?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I was at a conference for women leaders yesterday, and I felt like I was talking to my tribe, kind of shouting out, like, overachievers in the room, recovering perfectionists, where are you? Because the long and the short of it is being, Filipino Indian, first generation, immigrant parents, that sort of thing. That's kind of ingrained. That was ingrained in my DNA. And so to overachieve, to overdo. And I think that, as a kid, you kind of learn like it's what you, it's how you gain like validation and acceptance, because, your parents aren't going to be kind of, with you for everything, but they'll be with you if you're winning an award or if you're getting an accolade. And so kind of early on, you get that training of like, all right, overachieve to get. And so,
You paused for just a second. So you said overachieve to get?
Yeah, to basically get love, right? Acceptance. If we're going to break it down like super basic, the one thing that all of us humans desire, me being a psych geek and research nerd, is, the idea to be accepted and to be loved, right? That's what every single human desires. So that was reinforced by a lot of the overachievement, the accolades, because in our society, it was, comparing and keeping up with the Joneses and what so-and-so is doing and all of those things that now I've, worked to reprogram that. And of course, now I work with others to reprogram that in their minds. But so yeah, the overachievement, it's a real deal.
Yeah, I understand. I also joke that I'm a recovering perfectionist.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. So what did your parents do?
Yeah, so my dad actually was in real estate. And so he had an interesting background. My grandfather was the ambassador to the UN in India. And so he had a high, political, comes from that sort of family, and met a lot of the world's leaders and spoke 23 different languages. This was my grandfather, like in the 50s. And so my father was born before they, partitioned India and Pakistan. And so, kind of travel was in my father's blood. He didn't want to take on the, political limelight that my grandfather had created. So got a few of his, shares and started having pen pals from all over the world, and met these two hippie females from Wisconsin who became his pen pals actually, and actually sponsored him to come to the US. So my dad came with, his shares of my grandfather's, legacy, and my dad started quite a few businesses here and ended up doing real estate development. And so my mother she was an accountant.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, came from the Philippines, and mostly people from my mom's side were in healthcare. So nurses and that sort of thing. During that time, a lot of what they were looking for were nurses. So a lot of that, influx of Filipino nurses came to the States, and she wasn't a nurse, but she was an accountant. So she started her career as rebuilding that up here in the U.S. as a bank teller, and that's how she met my dad.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Were your parents around a lot when you were a child?
Yeah. So they were. I mean, I obviously, encountered quite a few different tragedies, losing them early on in life. But, from the very beginning, absolutely, we had a really tight knit community. And so from Filipino dancing to Indian dancing to everything else that you could schlep your kid into, from ballet to piano lessons and, violin lessons and everything. Because that's the story of a typical Asian, right? Growing up, get your kids in as many things as you possibly can. So they were. My mom actually got sick when I was 10. And so, the idea that they had these expectations that, it's the straight A's no matter what, like, don't even come home with a B. It's like a big deal. So it was like they had those rules and boundaries. But then the other thing is they needed to keep up with their lifestyle to be accepted in their community. And because they were they were immigrants, and, people coming in during that time were really trying to make it. And so, there was a lot of the showing off and all of that. So my mom actually, she worked quite a bit. And so I think what slowed her down was when she got sick. And so we had my grandparents, my mom's parents, that were actually helping raise us, and my dad's sister, who actually has been my biggest cheerleader, my whole life. She basically helped raise us. There were three of us. But my mom, so during the span of my high school years, during my adolescence, I ended up losing my mom. I had a brother and my father, and it was all through, medical diseases, actually. And so, it's one of the reasons why. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ask you, so, you found out your mom was sick when you were 10 years old, and then she was sick for 6 years before she passed away. Yeah. So that's a big turning point in your life. I mean, you're fully aware when you're 10 years old, and as you become 16, like, those are pretty critical years. So how do you think you were affected by your mom's sickness?
Yeah. It was, as you can imagine, right? Your whole world shakes up. It's kind of like the perfect storm. Now I talk about it, the perfect storm. Back then it was a disaster. But I think that obviously as the only, as the only girl in the home, having a little bit more of a traditional Indian father, I learned how to make tea and cook really early on. I was still the one, entertaining guests when I was 11, 12 years old, cooking meals for our families that would come over to visit my mom while she was sick. I got my earliest job was at 14. I definitely had to grow up fast. I was in charge of two younger brothers. And so that was a big part of, my life, is kind of raising them, and then also being this kind of ambiguous relationship with my father, not in a sexual way, but like cooking, cleaning, being that emotional layer of support for an Indian father who, in society back then, it's kind of like taboo that you don't have your wife around. And so there are a lot of these expectations for me to not just be a good girl, but to be this perfect, ideal person that's running around the house, but then also trying to figure out what the heck is happening as well. And then, of course, all of the other expectations that are, go along with it while you're that.
So you kind of took on the role, you took on many roles, but you also kind of took on the role of as a mother at a very young age. Yeah.
That was fun. With my youngest brother, because a year after my mom passed away, my brother DJ, who was about 16 months younger than me, he suddenly passed away. He had an asthma attack, and so it was a big tragedy, one after the other. And I was left to kind of raise this 14-year-old, and it's kind of like a kid raising a kid, and it's very and of course, with all of these emotions, as you're grieving, you're confused, you're lost, and there's emotions of anger, sadness, resentment, and I only knew how to parent because of how my parents were with me. And so I was passing that down to, younger brother, who at the time was 14, and was like, hey, I'm teenager, and, mad at the world because, things were kind of falling apart on the outside. So it was definitely a tough time for sure. And I think that, as we got older, my brother Vinay and I, because I had to step into that role, we're the only two people that would actually know what, those moments really felt like, even though we had a whole village around us really supporting us. And that's who I contribute, my greatest successes to, is because of that village. But, individually, when you're taking on a role of this ambiguous, older sister yet parent, and you want the best for them, it's very odd because you don't really have those skills. And so I kind of pushed a lot of that perfectionism and tried to make him to be, the overcoming perfectionist, that sort of, an overachieving person, as me. And it totally repelled the other way. So I totally understand with parents that now come to me, and moms that come to me that are just, trying to do their entrepreneurial journey, but then it's like not, passing down what didn't happen to them for their children. And so I'm very, very aware of that. Even I don't have kids right now, but I was exposed to it early on. And, that caused a lot of, rifts and just resentment between my brother and I very early, like in our 20s, when we were starting to heal and repair our relationship because of those complexities that we actually have.
Yeah. So I just want to take a step back. So here you are, 17, you lost your mom at 16, and a year later you lose your brother suddenly.
Yeah.
Were you, and it sounds like you had a lot of support around you. Were you also, how did you start to manage those traumatic events? Were you in therapy? Were you?
Yeah. So, I mean, traditionally for Asian families, it's like, nope, you study, get straight A's. You don't care about, don't worry about anything else. Therapy is not existent. But for my dad, I mean, he went into like losing my brother DJ was like the biggest shock. And, I still tear up every time I talk about it still, because it's so, you already go through the pain of watching, you're growing up and you're living in hospital settings and all of those things, but then you just get this major shock, like, whoa, okay, I thought we were done. I thought this was done. I thought we like paid our dues, or whatever the case is, whatever you want to call it. But, and then you have that. And I think it just changes your world so much overnight that you just have no choice but to, look at this, what I call resilience, and really say, all right. And I think my dad, because he had lost if you're a parent and you're losing a child, or, and then you lose your wife as well, it set him, through a deep depression, and we needed help. And so even for that, we were in therapy, family therapy, individual therapy, which I have other, ideas about that, but that would be a later podcast. But at least it was a starting point. My father was very big into, spirituality, community of any sort, although he was raised Hindu and Sikh, growing up in these two different faiths, and my mom was Catholic. He was like, go to everything under the sun. And honestly, like at that point, we had a lot of these evangelical Christians that were kind of like in our community, and from that community to, we had a lot of Muslim friends because we were in Chicago, whoever and however and whatever. It was like, all right, let's do it all, because when you're in that much of pain, you lose your sense of purpose. And I think back then you don't even know what that means. You can't even articulate that. And I think that now putting a name to that, of course, after studying so many different kinds of humans, it's so important to set that up because it really does take a village. It really does take a village. And so I think that through those individual communities, I realize the importance of community and what that does, whether it's a yoga community, whether it's CrossFit, whether it's running, what have you. But at 16 years old, you have no idea if you have immigrant parents, and they don't have any idea. And then you're hit with all of these adversities, and you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
we need something. So it was definitely supplemented, and so grateful for the community that we actually had in the form of these different faiths that were, housing us as family.
Mm-hmm. And then you lost your dad.
Yeah.
And what was that like for you?
Yeah, I think that was probably the hardest one. Yeah. 'Cause it was like, whoa, kind of a dagger, and you're like, whoa. It was, there was a lot of anger because we had family friends who are actually taking care of both my mom and my father. You have these oncologists, and even for them, I still remember the moment. It was in the summer, and my dad he had this like allergic reaction to a dye. My youngest brother was like dyeing his hair for a family wedding we were going to, and his face blew up twice the size, and we're like, okay, that's weird. So first we felt bad, and we're like, okay, he needs to go to the emergency room. What just happened? But then the moments after that, we're like, it was like we were in shock and in disbelief for at least 2 months. And, they wanted to start chemo and radiation. Of course, now I know so much more to a lot of the emotional sides and all these other things, which is probably why I got into that world.
So you found out he had cancer? He
had stage 4 lung cancer, and they just told him right away that he had 9 months to live. And so, it was, I think, I'm wearing this sweatshirt called Rebellion. And so I definitely, it was anger. One of the first emotions that came up, just screaming and yelling at the same doctors that treated my mom, thinking that they didn't know anything. And it was just so much emotion of like, why? First it was why, for sure. And then it was like, okay, let's see what happens. Let's pray to everything under the sun. You're 18 years old. I was 18 years old at this point, started college and all of that jazz. I was pre-health. Of course, wanted to go into this sort of field to help other humans, but it was really that. It was a shock. It was almost like, when is this going to end? Mm-hmm. And when I knew that it wasn't going to get better, like he was rapidly declining, and he wanted to do everything. So it was all the treatments that the doctors, of course, were saying. But so we lost him actually 7 months later, and but it was almost, it was bittersweet. I remember it was bittersweet because it was, okay, if this is meant to happen, there's obviously that hope at the end of the tunnel. I don't see it now, but it's something that you actually feel. And for some people, and I've met quite a few humans that have processed loss in a very different way. There's negative behaviors that form, and just all these distractive mechanisms that form. But at least for myself, I knew, all right, why is this in my path? Why? And that curiosity and that fascination of, well, if this was all meant to happen, then what do I see down the road? And how it was almost like, all right, how do I take my road, this long road, and where's the silver lining? So, and that's where I think that's where the overachievement started, because it was like nothing was going to get in my path. All right, I'll become a dentist. heck, I'll become a fucking, cosmetic dentist. Give it all to me. Let me just go at it. So it was like, charging my 20s was really, was charging, utilizing all of that energy and all of that pain as fuel to say, all right, here I am. This is what we're going to do. And we're going to rise above that. And so, yes.
So do you feel like you were almost chasing these external things to prove yourself, to make yourself feel better, because so many things had fallen apart? I mean, it sounds like your nature was already achieving, and then it just was like, okay, this is all that I know, and you relied on that to give you strength, which is amazing. There's so many parts of that are just extraordinary. I mean, the fact that even just to get through that, and it doesn't even sound like you got through it. It sounds like you really broke through on many levels. Like it didn't break you down. It made you go even faster ahead.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Before 30, definitely a lot of life lessons. For sure. I think that, yes, of course, that, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It was so much, and it was almost like it was exacerbated by all of these losses. It was like, all right, universe, bring it on. Like, what other challenges do you have for me? Like, I got this, So, so school was a piece of cake. Dental school was a piece of cake.
I mean,
all
I
of
just
those
have
things
to say,
were
it's
just
amazing that you're able to focus and get through school and dental school, and build this. You built $1 million practice. And it's amazing that you were able to stay focused.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, you hit it, because there's so many other pieces to that, puzzle as we unwind it. Females being in the medical industry, there was half of that. So it's like every single opportunity, it was almost like let me collect these chips on my shoulder. And so, let's see how many of these can you actually conquer and break through. I'm not looking back, of course, having, I think the biggest life lesson would yet to come after all of this, after, hitting the milestone at $1 million practice and all of those other things, when I would meet my ex-husband, actually. And so I think that would be the biggest, I think the largest test of resilience is when my own life was threatened. And so
what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think that's when it all came together. I fell in love in dental school. I got married, charted every single aspect of success, had the first class travel, the fancy cars, all of these things. But I was in an abusive, physically, emotionally, mentally abusive marriage. And he threatened to take my life, my brother's life. And so it was, at that point in time, I had become a victim. I talk about 3 different mindsets, but at that point in time, I was that victim. I had charged so much in my 20s, from school, from, trying to heal all of the pain and taking that pain and fueling it into something else, which was, of course, success. What I knew success was, and in this case,
like the fancy cars,
the monetary success, the things, the external points,
the marriage,
to get validated, right? The marriage, the 6-figure Bollywood, whatever wedding, all of those things, to kind of see, to almost say, okay, hey, I conquered this. I'm not this.
Hey world, I'm okay.
Exactly. And that's what it was, hey, don't pity me, even though I lost, my whole family. I'm okay. I've done all of this. But then, the universe was like, boom, you've got to learn some things.
And that was a real wake up call. It sounds
that was the biggest wake up call. And I am so, obviously it's been quite some years, but I'm so honored and so blessed to have had that huge awakening, because, you know, a lot of times life will hit you with resilience, life will hit you with those lessons, and you can look at them and learn from them, or you can keep going, and then the same types of people will come into your life to teach you some of those things that you have yet to learn. And I think for me, having met my ex-husband, and literally it was a very tumultuous relationship, very toxic on both sides. I was healing all of those losses, and, you know, and also ambitious, and like fueling it into, you know, somebody else who also had their own insecurities, their own ambitions. And it was just like, you know, oil and water. It was ready to just explode. And so
how did you get out of it?
It was, I mean, I hit my lowest levels of, uh, of confidence, ever in my life. And I had a girlfriend who had seen me during, when I had lost my mom and my brother. She went to high school with me, and it was one of, you know, my old girlfriends who was like, you've changed, you know, you're a different human. But she said one thing to me, and I still share this, you know, at all my talks, is that, you know, you have a choice. It's like she knew what I was hiding. And she said, you know, my parents have been living this way for 30 years. She says, you're not even 30 yet. And you think your life is over, but it's just beginning. And it's really up to you. It's up to you if you want to hide, or if you want to really step into you. And it hit me. And you know, we were at like a club, and in the bathroom of a club, it really hit me at that point where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm living this life not for anybody else. I mean, not for me, but for everybody else, for the show, for what society would think, for what people would say. And that was just like the illumination factor that just went, aha. And so, so of course, in the years, in the months to come, I mean, I left very haphazardly my home, everything that I knew, you know, and things got pretty, you know, pretty ugly in such a short span of time, from, you know, restraining orders and things like that. But I think it was the biggest lesson that I could ever imagine, because that really it really catalyzed my next evolution of myself that was just waiting to be birthed. And I think so many of us, they hide through all of the achievements, all of the accolades, and they keep rising. And there's something that just just explodes. And for me, I mean, for the first time ever, I experienced depression, and I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want, you know, to go and see my patients. I was a cosmetic dentist, and it's so crazy, because in that first year where I'm just, you know, everything's naked on the floor, like my soul is exposed completely. There was a lot of just learning for me as a leader. Even in the way that I showed up to, you know, patients and friends and family, of just being authentic. I didn't really know what my voice was. I thought my voice was to be this. I was 27.
Okay.
Sorry, I was 29 when I left. So
okay.
27 when I started my dental business, but 29 when I finally left. So it was this, you know, this awakening before I was 30 of, you know, a lot of, you know, meditation, yoga, shaman work, healing work. So I had a lot of different healers, spiritual teachers, and I was very lucky because, you know, I had my capital from, you know, this business that really allowed me to invest in myself, which I had invested in every other person around me, but I never once took the time to slow down. And, I mean, in my 20s, it was all, you know, all of those things. And until life really just said, no, I've got some bigger plans for you. But before that, we've got to take a step back, and we've got to, you know, reprogram you and break you up and just, you know, do all, take all of the parts that no longer work and pull the cords, you know, from you in every which way. I mean, everything was just out. It was almost like I wanted to stop everything, and I couldn't, because it was that point where my practice, I mean, like I grew 20% that year. The following year, 30%. I started hiring different doctors and dentists to take over that practice while I was just the business liaison, so that I can go and focus more in developing myself as a speaker, as a, all sorts of things. I started, of course, 5 other business enterprises all at the same time during that course of figuring out, well, what is it? Do I want to be this voice for females? Do I want to be this voice for Asian females? I started a nonprofit that really started looking at confidence building and self-awareness, self-love for Asian women. And that's how it started. And then it kind of, shifted into, masterminds for professional women. And because I realized like I wasn't alone in this, there's a lot of women that go through this, and even men. And so that's kind of what started this consulting coaching journey. Yeah.
When you say go through this, are you talking about this awakening process of healing yourself and really learning to be more confident in yourself and not chase the external to prove yourself to the world?
Exactly that. I think that when people wake up and start seeing, wow, this is what I was chasing in my, it's like, this is what I was chasing in my 20s. Okay. To be accepted and validated in society, you prove yourself and you get all of those things. You have that level of success of monetary income where you're like, okay, I'm writing the world. What's next? And then, you start, either something happens, like trauma in some way, business, personal, financial, where you're meant to question everything. And then it's like almost like in your 30s, it's kind of this rebuilding process, and rebuilding in whatever way. And then, you start being an advocate or taking a stand for something. Mm-hmm. But something that really, awakens your heart, and it's not, in that traditional way. And I think that, so many people are starting to see, oh, wow, what is that for me? What is it that in my own life am I hiding from, or have I suppressed so much, or I just haven't even figured out yet because I just haven't had the time. Mm-hmm. Because I'm so busy trying to chase that external, and you lose sense of yourself. You lose what you were chasing in the first place. Because as humans, we are meant to evolve. We are meant to shift and turn and change. And that's part of, it's part of the journey. So.
Yeah. So you mentioned awakens your heart. What awakens your heart?
Well, when I found my gifts a couple of years ago of recognizing how I ignite inspiration and transformation in other people, whether it's through my talks or businesses or workshops or whatever, I recognize that I've been doing this since I was 16. Job working at a servicing other people, either a dentist or as a teller at a bank or working in retail at a mall. But it was really to serve love, and I even have a bracelet that says serve love. But before I did it in the traditional world of smiles, and then it was in it was in helping other people make their businesses thrive. But now it's really serving love, as far as, in seeing the joy of other people figure out what that is for them. Mm-hmm. And that it's not all the things that we traditionally think it is. That's my greatest, my greatest gift and greatest joy. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you had seen all these healers. Can you share with us one moment that you remember that was really impactful?
Wow. Yeah, actually it was, there's a few, but the biggest, the monumental, there's 2 I'll share. The first one was when I decided to go to Burning Man. And, it's this collective of a week. You're actually with, 70,000 people from around the world. And it's really how artists come together and they create this whole city that's kind of made out of nothing. But where the where the currency is love and really radical inclusion for, however you want to look like, speak like, talk like. And there's so many different immersive workshops, from, music and parties to TED style workshops to recognizing the humanity in yourself that we don't get to see because we have these masks and these agendas that we have as in the default world, as we call it. But over here in this desert, where there's a vast array of different kinds of people that are coming together, and of course you have these different types of experiences. I actually had one of my first experiences with psychedelics there. And that opened my eyes to, a lot of things as far as just healing within my heart, and opened my eyes to a lot of the plant medicine that would then, change the way I kind of viewed the world and what I was doing. And that really was the opening for me to say, wow, I'm not meant to be in, in the healthcare profession, and what is my exit strategy? How am I going to, cause part of me was like, well, yeah, I'm a badass. I can do this, and I'll just get other people to work for me. But I think the biggest thing was moving and really seeing how the world around me, worked. And so that having those experiences actually catapulted me traveling to 35 different countries on this quest to interview as many leaders as possible before my book came out. So yeah, so that was one. And the second one was my 3-day plant medicine experience with ayahuasca. And so it was right then when that Monday I called my financial advisors. I said, all right, let's get the practice up for sale. It's time. I mean, it's almost like my parents, in the form of, their angels, kind of came and talked to me. My family, it was like they were celebrating this next evolution, that I was just going to be okay. And it was almost like closure and this, I guess, softening of me being okay with this unknown territory that I was going to start charting in whatever it looked like.
So Neeta, I mean, you are one of the strongest people I've ever met and spoken with. And I'm just curious, because sometimes painful events really break us, and sometimes they make us stronger, and sometimes there's a combination of both, right? And it's usually to some extent a combination. Would you agree with that?
Oh, totally.
So I'm just curious, because your strength is just so apparent to me. I'm just curious if you feel like you had a certain belief from these negative events, like I'm strong or I can handle anything, and these certain beliefs that you rely on to get you through whatever you're facing.
Yeah. For the longest time, I didn't even know they were called affirmations at the time, but these were my own statements that I would use, that I would write in my journal, ever since I was 10 years old, and my dad found them in my, underneath my bed, and wanting to see all the boys that I was writing to. But I would always say, you are bold. And that was kind of, you are bold, you are brave, you are bold, you are brave, you are bold, you are brave. And so even, and actually saying thank you, it was my form of gratitude. And of course I've had many seasons of beliefs that obviously I've held on to growing up, being immersed in, so many different aspects of life, from, culturally, and then with these communities. But the one thing that I had always kept for myself was just saying a note of thanks. Whether there was, and I'm not, I don't believe in any dogma of any particular faith or anything like that, but what I do believe in is love. And so the idea that okay, my affirmations when I was 12 years old was be bold and, and then of course I added unapologetic, but, be bold and brave even when my father passed away. So it was after all of those losses. And then it reignited again, going through the deepest, darkest times that would really test my soul. And that was kind of like this, it became this like affirmation, this mantra. I started writing it everywhere. And then I started adding more things to it. But, for anybody that's kind of listening that is stuck like in that needs that sort of strength. I mean, I kind of wear these types of things all over. I have a chain that says, patience and courage. I have a bracelet that says, serve love. So I think that any sort of, motto that you can extract for yourself is that constant reminder is so, words are powerful and we underestimate the value of those words. But yeah.
Yeah. What you mentioned that there's 3 different mindsets and one was the victim.
Yeah.
What are the other 2?
Yeah. So the victim, of course, and then the other 2 are survivor and thriver. And, survivor is kind of like the idea that, okay, you've gone through something really traumatic and radical and you're still kind of trying to figure it out, but you're also still kind of referring back to that, the victim state. And so, and then with thriver, it's basically that you are so committed to growth and that you're flourishing, that you're thriving, that you're utilizing all the lessons that you've learned along the way to propel you forward. And so those 3 different mindsets. But I do believe that for a lot of people, you've got to go through one, to get to the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. How do you teach emotional grit? Is it something that can be taught?
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I use GRIT as an acronym and I use it for quite a few reasons. I talk a lot about resilience simply because in my mind, resilience and grit mean the same thing. In other parts of the world, when I'm in Asia, they're like, what is this grit? Why, what is this? So it's like, I use it interchangeably with resilience, but the acronym that I teach is grow, reveal, innovate, and transform. And so the idea that, if we're not aware of our own surroundings, if we're not aware of our own decisions, we can't make better ones. And so the idea is if you're hit with any sort of adversity or challenge in life, we can be resentful or we can say, what did I learn from this? And how can I change my perspective? How can I do better? And so I think innately you asked me, what was, that belief, but innately I always thought, okay, that awareness I always kind of just had, like it's like this, inner knowing, intuition, whatever you want to call it. But, the awareness of yourself that you had. So that's grow. So if you're open to it and your ability to be aware is heightened. And then reveal is obviously when you're accepting you wherever you're at. So you're revealing this new sense of yourself and your sense of perspective because you are accepting where you're at on your journey. You're not here, you're not point A, you're not at point B, you're just accepting where you're at. And then the I is for innovation. And I use that as you're committing to change. And then T is transformation or action. Like, what is that strategy? What is it that you're going to, what action steps are you going to actually do to chart forward, down the road in whatever that means to you?
Can you talk a little bit about your book and what your practice looks like now?
Yeah, of course. Wow. So Emotional Grit, it was launched about a year ago and became a bestseller. And I've been working with a lot of incredible leaders and entrepreneurs as far as their mindset. And so really it's been around cultivating that mindset. A lot of people have, imposter syndrome, the idea that they're a fraud, that it's not enough. It's, they're never going to be enough, or somebody's going to figure out who they actually are. And emotional grit has really been a sense of resilience training. So I do these resilience workshops, and I do speak on resilience and compassionate resilience at corporations, at events. I do run a business accelerator called Accelerate. And that's for, that's the segment of the business that works solely with female entrepreneurs that are, working towards their next chapter. And whether it's furthering or fostering their mission to getting their business modalities out, because I've worked with so many different startup founders before they go to burnout. And so kind of cultivating to see, well, how they can actually make an impact in, whatever community that they are desiring to be in. So,
and just out of curiosity for people listening, let's say somebody's out there and they're listening, they're like, oh, I would love to do that, but I'm stuck in this kind of job or business, and I feel like I can't switch, or whatever it is. I'm just curious, do you feel like, let me say it this way. Mm-hmm. How do you, what's the difference in terms of awareness in your body that you feel now doing the work that you do than you did when you were in the quote unquote wrong relationship, or, you were doing your dental practice that wasn't like, your life's work, so to speak? Can you share with us the difference that it feels?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, it's like before, everything was kind of like here. It's like I had all this weight on my shoulders, and it was almost like, okay, you need to keep crushing through and keep going and keep, chartering and there's all these like, I guess you can say like hurdles to go over. And it was almost like the adrenaline kept me on fire. And so I carried a lot of this weight here on my shoulders. And now from here, it really has, I teach one of this, in my exercises. Actually, it's funny when you're teaching it to a bunch of executive men where you're telling them to put their hands over their hearts. It's kind of a funny thing to see, but it's coming from my heart now. Mm-hmm. and in like even kind of my stomach area, which is strange, but if you're into like energy work and chakras, you'll know that it's part of your creativity. And dropping from my left brain, which most of us are, going into my right brain, which is where the creativity is, and where we do get into more of our creative and our higher aspects of ourself. That's kind of where I feel it now. And so, thank you for asking that question.
Yeah. I think it's such an important question because
I don't feel.
Yeah. And I know from my own experience, like, when I think I should do something and I'm going for it and it's a push, mm-hmm. And now I feel a pull. Because sometimes I don't want to do certain things, I have that resistance, but yep. I feel a pull, and it's a very different sensation than when I wasn't on the higher path for me. So, mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Totally. Yeah. But I mean, not being numb to your body, like really being able to go in and really understand, well, what does it actually feel like?
Do you have an action that you can share with us that maybe a listener could take out there that has struggled with loss and is feeling kind of down right now and out and is looking to feel more resilient and more confident? Yeah.
So I would definitely say if you are actually going through something right now, you're listening to the right show, you're listening to the right podcast. And, get out something to write with, because, and this is super simple, actually, So think about all of those, life lessons. And I think here over the last hour, I've shared like, at least 4 or 5. And so this is something that I do, with my clients, with my students. And I've got like a program called Boundless that teaches kind of how to step out of the shackles that kind of hold us, and create what, things actually mean for ourselves. So for you, take a notepad and go ahead and write down what were some of those instances that you maybe call failures. Maybe it was like failed relationships or betrayals from friends, or failures in business, or jobs that you got laid off on, whatever it is that has kept you stuck. And I want you to write down, the learning lessons, like the pros from it. Like, what did you gain as a result? Like, if you are not judging yourself in this situation, but you're actually just looking at that, what did you gain as a result? And what were some of the things that you could have done better? And from there, then you can start to see your journey. Like, take some of those instances and really see and start to write down. I mean, you might have like all of the resentment and the anger and all of those emotions come up, but when that's all released out on paper, then looking at yourself and looking at the situation from a third perspective, what did that lesson actually teach you? Where did you actually land? So from that failed business, where are you at now? Or what part of your journey, where did it take you? Who did you meet as a result? From that failed relationship, how are you, filtering out men or women now? So there is definitely a path to it. If you're stuck right there, you might not see it, but I encourage you. It is one of the most popular exercises that I do anywhere I go. And, it's my gift to you. And Anna, thank you so much for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you.
So powerful.
Thank you so much. So tell us how we can get in touch with you.
Oh, yes, please. I've got a virtual campus with courses and things like that. You can definitely find me on Facebook. That's the most active. I do a lot of my, personal stuff on Instagram. So if you're curious about that, Instagram, Neeta Bhushan, or Neeta Bhushan on Facebook. And then neetabhushan.com is where you'll find everything from all of courses, workshops, retreats, and hopefully we can stay connected.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and being such a light worker in the world. And, I just want to honor your story and what you've been through and how you've transformed, because it's really, really incredible.
Thank you, Anna. It has been such an honor to be with you and chatting with you. Really amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.